name's Craig Clark. I'm the president of the Portsmouth Historical Society. I just want to welcome you all tonight to our presentation of the 1938-1954 hurricane with Jim. I want to mention a few other things first. I'm excited to announce we have a brand new website that we launched last week. If you have a chance, please look at it. One feature that we have, which we're excited about as well, is having an Eventbrite. So for some of our events, if you want to register for it, most of our events you don't have to register for, but there are plenty. We have a walk coming up on October 7th with Melville with Stephen Luce. I think that's limited for how many people can register for that event. We have a talk coming up on October 19th with Michael Tugis. He is the author of King Philip's War, The History and Legacy of America's Forgotten Conflict. On October 26th, if you didn't realize that October is Archaeology Month, that we are having a talk by Jay Waller, who is discussing some of his recent findings regarding the Battle of Rhode Island site and different areas, the Reese property, on different areas in Portsmouth. We have some other construction projects going on. We're starting our new roof. On our south side of the roof is getting started this coming month, and the old schoolhouse is going to be refurbished this month as well, starting this month. So we have some projects there, and I know a few of you will be happy to say that we are working on plans for a new lift outside, a new person lift outside to make it safer to come up and down to our talk. So we'll be reaching out to everyone for help with that project, and I think it's something that's way past due. And now that we're year round, we want to make it more accessible up here for all of you to attend. What else? Did I forget anything, Becky? I'm sure I did. I want to thank as well any docents we have here, because I don't know if you've noticed or not, but our museum is open right now, which the Schmidts and Mrs. Lynch back here helping out before and after showing our museum. We've had recent really good success. We had a family day 2 weeks ago. We had about 40 to 50 family members here, just enjoying the facility. So this will be somewhat a newer model for us moving forward, trying to make this a before and after event for all of our talks. So I hope you enjoy this new format, and we look forward to talking after tonight to have a quick drink together. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our retired naval officer, school teacher at Portsmouth Abbey, professional photographer, master gardener, and our town historian, Mr. Jim Garden.
What a nice turnout. Good. We didn't all get scared off last week, huh? Yeah. We're not done yet, by the way. We should realize that. I've gathered a lot of photographs from the hurricanes, not a whole lot during the hurricanes because you'd be crazy to go out, although some people do, but mostly the aftermath, and on the whole island, not just Portsmouth, so it's a broad-based presentation. And my collection of stuff is on the table downstairs if you want to take a look at that afterwards. I also have written, one of my books has a chapter on the hurricanes, the hurricane of 38 and 54. So you can look at that, and if you'd like to buy one, you may. We'll let you. Okay, anyone who ever lived through a hurricane is convinced they'll never do it again, and yet we do, time after time after time. So here we go. I have a lot of photographs of hurricane and hurricane damage. So what we're going to do is talk about 38 and 54, although there were other hurricanes, and most of us experienced Bob and Sandy and a couple others that came along afterwards. But these were the two really horrific ones. And by the way, as I speak, if you can't hear me in the back row, please wave to me so I can project. I taught school for 39 years. I can talk pretty loud if I want to. Okay, so here we go. A few introductory photographs. Washington Square, this is in 1938, and Newport Beach at the same year. And we'll see much more of these later on. And then 54, Market Square, and the police station, which is on the right of that photograph on the left there, and the carousel at Easton's Beach. And there are stories about some of the horses seem to have disappeared after the hurricane and ended up in a lot of people's basements. where I think they still are. Okay, so a certain amount of text here first, and then it'll be all pictures, so bear with me as far as the text goes. We've been vulnerable to many hurricanes in our history. The first one was in 1638, when the settlement of Portsmouth took place. The term hurricane wasn't used back then, but we had the Great Gale of 1815. We had another one in 1869, 1938. In 54, we had two. In 91 and 2012, and of course, many others. We're all familiar with the routine of following these things up along the eastern seaboard. We also had a hurricane in 1778 when the colonial troops were massed in front of Fort Butts and ready to move on to Newport to push the British out of Newport, and they got hit with a hurricane there. And because many of the soldiers that were in the colonial army at that time were 20-day volunteers, a lot of them found their way home after the storm. They had tents, they had no protection really to speak of, and they rode out about 2 days of a hurricane in August of 1778. So I'm going to concentrate on 38 and 54, even though we all have experienced other ones since. 85 years ago today, September 21st, 1938, Newport County and all of New England was hit hard by what we now call the 38 hurricane. They didn't name them then. They didn't name them until the early 50s. So it has to be referred to as the Hurricane of 38. The results were disastrous. They were catastrophic, really, in Rhode Island, especially for the local communities. We got hit hard. Interestingly, at 10 o'clock in the morning of that day, September 21st, 1938, it was about 70 degrees, sun was shining, and nobody really believed it was really going to come here. No idea what was coming. So we're spoiled today because we have the Weather Bureau and we have Tony Petrarca, who was on TV for 3 straight hours the other night, talking about the storm that was coming at us. We didn't have television. We didn't have the accounts. The Weather Bureau was mildly staffed, not like they are today. And obviously, as far as technology is concerned, it was very primitive. So that was one of the problems. We didn't expect it. The storm was formed off the coast of Africa on September 9th, as they usually do. And this map shows you the track of that storm as it came across the Atlantic and made a big turn before it got to Florida and came up into New England. On the 20th, they said it was a Category 5 storm. They did have category storms back then. I have a list of them coming up on another slide. And it was on its way. The important thing about this 38 hurricane was the speed with which it moved across the water. It moved very fast, as much as 70 miles an hour. Okay, so we have the different categories. We all have listened to this endlessly over the last week and a half, but those are the numbers that are normally used for the category storms. And of course, as we experienced last week, they become a Category 5, then the next day they're a Category 3, and then the next day they're a Category 1, and then back up to a 3, and so on. They move around a lot. There was a high pressure center over Bermuda, which, as it moved up the Atlantic, it kept the storm between Bermuda and along the Atlantic coast, and began to roar with considerable speed across the water. Again, the highest recorded track across the water of any storm. The winds of the hurricane in the northern hemisphere rotate counterclockwise, and the right side of that circle is considered what's called the dangerous semicircle. That's where there's more damage done when it does hit land. And at 8:30 on the 21st, this storm was off Cape Hatteras, North Carolina. But what happened is there's an interesting book by R.A. Scotty, I have it here, that came out about 2004 or so, called Sudden Sea. and it's available on Amazon. You can get it. Scotty is Scotti, Sudden Sea. And she was a Providence person, and she wrote a lot about it. Here's what she said. At 2 o'clock, the swath of the coastline from Cape May to Maine was one of the wealthiest and most populous in the world. By evening, it would be desolate. The great hurricane of 1938 was more than a storm. It was the end of a world. Okay. It really was incredibly intense. So the storm began to turn to the northeast, and the winds diminished somewhat. It was downgraded to a Cat 3, and expectations were that high pressure was going to push it out to sea, and we wouldn't have to worry about it. There was an individual at the Washington Weather Bureau named Charles Pierce, and he was a new guy, and he did some forecasting and checking and so on, and he said, it's going to go straight north from Hatteras, and it's going to clobber New England. And everybody laughed at him. They said, no, not going to happen. You're a new guy. You don't really know how these things work. They all disagreed. And so as late as 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the advisories didn't indicate that it would hit land. It was going to go out to sea. At 2:30, it hit Long Island. The storm tracked from off Cape Hatteras to Long Island, 425 miles, covered it in 7 hours, which is the fastest moving storm ever recorded. Okay. Obviously, they didn't record the speed of the storms back in the old days, but in modern times anyway. It had severe damage in Long Island and moved across Long Island Sound to Connecticut. It landed between Bridgeport and New Haven, the center of it, and that put Rhode Island and our area in the dangerous right semicircle. It struck at high tide, and there also was a full moon, both of which affected the intensity of the storm. So it was a surprise, but the thing was that it moved very quickly, moved across Rhode Island very quickly. But in the state of Rhode Island, in that storm, in that one day, over 400 people died. 175 of them along the shore. The devastation, especially on South County shores, toward Westerly and over in that area, was very, very high. There's an area over there called Napatree Point, which is near Westerly. It's a peninsula that kind of sticks out into the Atlantic Ocean. It was full of houses at that time, summer cottages. After the storm, there was not one standing. They all were destroyed. And 42 people floated on rooftops to Connecticut as a result of that. The wind swung from 120 to 150 mile an hour. In downtown Providence had no protection. There was no hurricane barrier then, as there is now. A wall of water 17 feet high went up the Narragansett Bay and didn't stop until it got to downtown Providence. And then it did a great deal of destruction. A lot of water in downtown Providence. You'll see some pictures of that in a minute. Newport Harbor was also a disaster area, especially the low-level waterfront area. Bellevue Avenue, of course, was protected because it's above the water, but there was a lot of tree damage on Bellevue Avenue. Serious, major 200-year-old trees were uprooted. The steeple of the First Baptist Church downtown collapsed into the street. Locally, in Island Park, there was a 12-foot wall of water that came up the Sakonnet River. If you stand in Island Park and you look down to the Atlantic Ocean, there's nothing there but water. And so the surge, the tidal surge that came up the river kept coming and kept coming. And when it hit Island Park, the height of it was 12 feet. 12 feet of water all at once. The damage was severe. 19 people died in Island Park because they couldn't get out. There was no escape bridge, by the way. Okay, there just was the only way up was up to the East Main Road. So some houses in Island Park were washed all the way across to the Montauk Country Club, the Hathaway Peach Orchard, and over that direction. The whole house went across that way from Park Avenue. So all the communities along Narragansett Bay suffered considerable flooding and much property damage at this time. The Governor Carr Ferry, the Jamestown Ferry, got underway to ride out the storm. Sometimes ships do that. The idea of being along shore is very dangerous. When I was in the Navy, we rode out a couple of hurricanes on a buoy out in the bay or out in the open ocean. It was safer there than being close to the shore where you're going to get banged into the piers and everything. The Governor Carr tried to ride out the storm, lost power, and ran aground on Jamestown. A lot of stories of individual experiences, and Scotty in her book really explains a lot of them, a lot of individual experiences. So I would recommend that one book as a fairly recent book. A lot of things, and down on the table downstairs you have my collection of stuff, and most of that was done at the time of the hurricanes and not later. Her book is much later, where there's more time to analyze what went on and to talk to people who had experienced different things. September 22nd, the next morning, sun came out, beautiful day. But power and telephone service was out, and a lot of roads were not passable. The amount of electrical power that was down was somewhere in the vicinity of about 85% in the state. 433 people died in Rhode Island. That's a lot. 7 children from Jamestown, 4 of them from one family, the Matos family, died at Mackerel Cove. The school bus driver, they were coming home from school, the school bus driver tried to hurry across that really narrow area. Some of you know Mackerel Cove, and there's a very thin road that goes through that. He tried to drive through that and did not succeed, and the bus got washed out to sea. So 4 kids from one family died, and the parents went down to the shore to try to find their children and observed that happening. Grim story. There was also a cellist family who lost one child in that school bus, and the driver, you can imagine what his life was like after this. The driver and one 11-year-old boy, one of the cellist boys, survived. The driver came ashore somewhere around Mackerel Cove. Cellist, and this gives you an idea of the force of the wind, he was in the water and he came ashore at the landing of the Jamestown Ferry, all the way around through the entrance of Narragansett Bay and up to the Jamestown Ferry. He was 11 years old and he survived. He was the son of the Beavertail lighthouse keeper. So the 1938 hurricane passed, the worst ever. It was the worst ever to affect New England. And now it was time to start cleaning up. The cost, according to Scotty's book, was $4.7 billion in today's dollars. About 20,000 buildings were wrecked, houses, offices, everything. And 93,000 families suffered serious property loss. And again, nearly 600 people in all of New England died as a result of this storm. So what we have in terms of display coming up are a few of the photographs, just not very many, were taken during the storm. There are some nutcases like me that go out and photograph things when hurricanes are happening. But William King Covell was a famous photographer who lived in Newport. And he went out and took some pictures during the storm, and you will see those, some of those, in a minute. In addition, there are photographs taken in the aftermath by Elizabeth Richardson, later she was Elizabeth Coit, of the hurricane. The dates aren't specifically provided for her photographs, but it's pretty clear they were taken a day or two after the storm. So here we go on photographs. The Elm Street Pier, underwater. Okay. He lived at the point, so this was all close by. And looking north from Battery Park toward the Naval War College, you see what the surf was like there. This is during storm, obviously. Newport Beach on the left, and Thames Street at Mary. And people did ride canoes down the street. Okay. But Newport Beach was really devastated. Washington Street, much of it underwater. The pier at the Naval Hospital, underwater, very exposed. There wasn't, by the way, any Newport Bridge there at that time, by the way. We're still dealing with ferry service across the bay. And this is the aftermath, some of the photographs aftermath. Washington Square that you see at the top with the big trees down. And the ferry Beaver Tail, which again got underway but lost power and went aground on Jamestown. Okay. Long Wharf and Coddington Cove. The Coddington Cove picture is a little deceiving. You have to really look close to see that the railroad tracks are like this. They're all wrinkled. Okay. But Long Wharf, as you can see, not much was left standing there either. The embankment, the bridge embankment at Island Park in the top picture there, the railroad embankment, okay, with a yacht up on top of it. And again, you look at the pictures in the foreground, that was a cottage that was just destroyed. And another one from Island Park at the bottom. There was no protection from the surf at Island Park. The Newport waterfront, you can see the armory in the background of the top picture there. And Third Beach. That chimney, I don't know if it's still there, but the chimney was there for a long time from a house that was at Third Beach. The First Baptist Church downtown, right downtown Newport, near Washington Square, lost its steeple. And the rotunda at Easton's Beach was destroyed as well. First Beach never really recovered from this hurricane, because before this time they had a boardwalk, they had a roller coaster, they had all kinds of activities going on at Newport Beach, and the hurricane just wiped them out. Another picture of the First Baptist Church with the cupola laying on the ground on the left-hand side. And this car, this was in Island Park, but look at this car, the power of water, the damage that water can do. Look, it's just incredible to see this. Bailey's Beach, Long Wharf. And this was after they started cleaning up. Cars along the reservoir in Newport. And on the left, what you see is one of the dead bodies. People drowned along the beachfront there. In Island Park, this is a series of postcards that were done at Island Park. You have a house in the middle of Park Avenue, in the top one. And then on the right, you have the railroad bridge and just stuff piled up against it. Houses, cottages, parts of houses. Again, you have a turned over house in front of Bob Hamilton's office. Okay. And then you have, again, just cars were just lifted up and pushed around. We can't understand the power of the water. Amazing. These are in Tiverton, but again, you see in the vicinity of the Sakonnet River, you can see the damage that was made. Pretty difficult job cleaning up all this mess. keep in mind that the United States was coming out of a depression at this time as well, and a lot of people didn't work. Of course, a lot of people went to work for the government to help clean up this mess, and that was a big part of the public works projects to recover from this. Okay, that's 38. Again, there are a lot more pictures. I have about 60 or 70 pictures of each of these hurricanes in an album, in albums downstairs you can look at after. August 31st, 1954, Hurricane Carol. By this time they were naming them. And in many cases, most cases, where there was a severe one, that was the last time that name was used. They removed those names. They don't use some of them anymore. Carol was really bad also, and caused about, in 1954 dollars, $460 million damage, and 150,000 people were left without electricity and telephone service. It wasn't as bad as 38, but it was bad. Over 12,000 homes were damaged, many of them destroyed, 65 deaths in Rhode Island, and lots of injuries. The costliest, in terms of dollars, the costliest hurricane in the United States to that time. So the Weather Bureau was just starting to name them, and the name Carol was retired after this one. As usually happens, as we observe, as we did last week, we observe hurricanes coming along the coast. We expect them to somewhat harmlessly get pushed out into the Atlantic Ocean and end up in Africa someplace. Sometimes that happens, but sometimes there's a high pressure system in the middle of the ocean which forces the hurricane along the coast. And that's when things get really damaging. Carol made landfall at eastern Long Island, on 31 August 1954 with wind gusts of 125 miles an hour. Then it came to Connecticut, went across the Sound to Connecticut, to Old Saybrook, near New London, and once again we were in the dangerous semicircle of the storm. Wind gusts of 135 miles an hour on Block Island, and over 100 miles an hour when it got to land, to mainland. It moved quickly, again 35 miles an hour over the land, and the landfall also at this time was close to high tide, which is always a problem because there's so much water coming into the towns and areas along the bay. But Rhode Island was better prepared in 1954 than they had been in 1938. 1938 had really awakened a lot of people and given them a heads up about the fact that these storms can really cause a lot of damage. And also the fact that Carol came early, around noontime, just before noon, so there was more daylight to work with to sort of realize what was coming and to get out of the way. 85% of the homes in Rhode Island lost power. Tremendous storm surge again up Narragansett Bay, which only stopped when it got to downtown Providence. I mentioned before they had talked about a hurricane barrier after 1938. Yes, they had talked about it. They didn't do anything about it. Needless to say, after 1954, they made plans to build a hurricane barrier, and they did. It's still there now. Again, another 12-foot wall of water came up the Sakonnet River and crashed onto Park Avenue and all the houses there. 30 houses were swept away. Imagine houses, they were swept back into the Sakonnet River and also all the way across to Montauk, to that area. I talked to one individual he was in high school and he went to see his family's house, which was on the shore of Island Park. And he couldn't get down, but he got down the next day and found that the whole house had been lifted and dropped on Park Avenue. And he went in, and the beds were still made on the second floor and things like that. I mean, it was just no change, except the whole house was moved off its foundation. Anyway, they did decide at this point now that Providence should have a hurricane barrier. The beach areas in South County were hard hit all the way from Westerly to Narragansett. One of the things that happens in the modern world, and it still happens today, is people build closer and closer to the water. I have to have a water view when I get up in the morning. So they build their houses, in some cases along the bay, in other cases hanging over it. And so they were really vulnerable at this point. And they're still building that way, by the way. The beach area in South County was hard hit all the way from Westerly to Narragansett. Houses had been built closer to the water than before and more damage. And there still is that problem today of building close to the water. The wind was accompanied by very heavy rain, inundating the waterfront at Newport. The police station, which was at Market Square at that time, received 5 feet of water. Navy ships, which generally anchored out in Newport Harbor, there weren't any Navy piers at that time. They were getting ready to build the Pier 1. They went out into the bay to ride out the storm from either anchor or from mooring buoys that were out there. All the famous beaches of Newport, Bailey's, Hazard's, Easton's, and especially 3rd, were severely damaged by the storm surge. And of course, Island Park was a shambles. There was hardly a building still standing. Some houses were floated across Park Avenue, and some were several hundred yards from their foundations. The Boudreaux family, this is an interesting story that I encountered in one of the books. They had a summer cottage in Common Fence Point, and Mrs. Boudreaux was there with her 2 children, and the water was rising, and so they went up to the 2nd floor. Well, the water kept rising. They were right on Narragansett Bay. The water kept rising, so they ended up getting on the roof of their cottage, which floated away. And it floated up almost to Somerset, and then the winds changed and drove them south, and they were picked up by the crew of a Navy ship below the Mount Hope Bridge, and they survived. Amazing story. Imagine telling that story to your children and grandchildren. They were rescued, and this is a picture of them from the Navy ship being rescued. Whew. Hurricane Carol continued to do more damage on Cape Cod. 20,000 people there had been evacuated and on to Boston and further north. The steeple of the Old North Church, from which Paul Revere had been given his signal for his ride, was blown down. And the storm blew over Canada on that night of 31 August, all the way from Newport Beach to Canada on the same day. It was moving. A wide swath of damage all the way across. One of the things in Portsmouth that had a lot of problems over time was the Stone Bridge. We all know where the Stone Bridge was. We still have the access to it down there in Island Park. But it got beat up a lot. I have an aerial photograph of Stone Bridge, and the bridge itself was just out in the middle of the Sakonnet River, and the approaches were extensive to get to it. So it got beat up a lot. But it was there was a stone bridge there from the early 1800s until 1956. And part of the reason it was condemned eventually was the 54 hurricane, which totally beat it up. At the same time, they were in the process of beginning to build the Sakonnet River Bridge at that time, the first Sakonnet River Bridge. And so they patched together the stone bridge to be able to use it, and they got to the point where it would not take cars. You had to, if you wanted to use it, you had to walk across because it was so beat up. Anyway, and finally in 1956 it was closed when the Sakonnet River Bridge opened. September 25th, 1956, the Sakonnet River Bridge was opened at a cost of $9 million. The second Secundit River Bridge was built at a cost of, I think it was a little over $300 million by comparison. Okay. A lot of damage in Tiverton as well. The Nanaquacket Bridge was swept off its base. Riverside Drive was part of the Secundit River. It's very low level over on that side. In Little Compton, there wasn't a building standing on Secundit Point. And that happened in 38 as well, by the way. 38 Secundit Point was just swept clean. Again, in 54. A lot of fishing shacks, things like that. The aftermath of Carroll, martial law was declared by the governor, and the National Guard was called out in Massachusetts and in Rhode Island to prevent looting. And workers came from many other states. This is an interesting consideration. Some of you may have noticed, I saw on the news last week, it was parked at some motel in Providence or Warwick, someplace. There were, I think, 30 trucks from a tree company in Illinois. They brought these huge forces of trucks here because of the potential damage from the storm. And they're all sitting there parked in the parking lot. I actually saw that. I think it was Gloria or Bob. I saw another place where they had like 30 trucks, all from the same company, from a couple hundred miles away, many miles away. Anyway, now they do that. Power was restored, although it took a long time to do it, and the state of emergency lasted for quite a while. Rhode Island and Massachusetts were declared federal disaster areas by President Eisenhower in 1954. And of course, what that does is that opens up the area for considerable federal grants to help clean up the mess. After Carroll went away, about 3 days later, we got another one. Hurricane Edna came along, September 2nd. Carroll was August 31st. Another devastating hurricane, Hurricane Edna, but it was more easterly. The center of it went over Cape Cod and caused a tremendous amount of damage there and in Boston and in Maine. But we were in the non-serious semicircle that time. We got a lot of rain, but we did not get as much damage. There wasn't much more damage to do because Carroll had destroyed everything. Anyway, we got 5 to 8 inches of rain out of Edna, just a couple days after Carroll. A lot of the damage was further up in New England from that. So what we have following here now are additional photographs from 1954, again taken by Elizabeth Richardson Coit in the aftermath of their hurricane. Most of these are taken in Newport because, again, the roads were impassable. You couldn't get out the West or East Main Road. And the series of devastations were considerable. Efforts to clean up were underway. So here's some of those. Long Wharf, Washington Square. Although looks like a policeman is walking down Long Wharf. It wasn't that deep, but you can see the amount of water that there was, and also on Thames Street. You could float a boat on both of them. Okay. And you can imagine, as these storms went by buildings, cellars filled up, and a lot of damage was done in stores. The government landing was underwater. The Newport Yacht Club was virtually destroyed by this boat that crashed against it. Long Wharf on the top left picture, and a sailboat that was run ashore there. Bellevue Avenue, again, tree damage mostly, but a lot of tree damage. Newport very much prides itself on its old trees, and over these hurricanes, they lost a lot of good ones. Cars washed from Easton's Beach into the moat and the Newport Casino. The upper picture there's an interesting story that goes with that one. I was giving a lecture about this about 5 years ago at the library, and I showed this picture, and I heard this groan from the audience. I said, "What's the matter?" And this one guy raised his hand. He said, "I was in that car." He said, in the upper car on top. They were going down to see what the storm was like, and they got to Newport Beach, and their car was washed into the embankment across the road. And he said they went over the embankment into the reservoir, not into the water, but just into that part of the reservoir, and rode out the storm there. Then they walked home to Middletown. But wow, can you imagine? I was so lucky that night. I had 2 copies of that picture, and I gave him one, because imagine what a memory that was. Wow. The tennis casino was pretty beat up, as you can see. And this is the Easton Beach bathhouses, which have been built and rebuilt many, many times. The Paradise Lunch on Thames Street was underwater. Church Street, again, we can't, I don't know, unless you live through it, you can't picture the size of these trees coming down and the damage that they could do. Wow. Here's Mary Street, again with a school there on the left. Easton's Beach again was destroyed. How many times had they rebuilt that? And now, because some of the buildings there are condemned, they're going to have to rebuild it again. That's really sad, because again, one of the things I do is collect a lot of old postcards. And I was looking at my Newport collection the other day, and I probably have 50 postcards of Newport Beach in its day, when they had a boardwalk, a roller coaster, and people just went there, and nobody went in the water. I mean, just went there to parade around in the 1880s, 1890s, all totally fully dressed. If you put a bathing suit on, you had to cover up just about everything. But it has a wonderful history. I'd really like to write the history of Newport Beach sometime, because there's a lot there, and I have lots of pictures. But again, this is what happens to it periodically as we get these storms. And in Market Square, you got a couple of the Newport ferries there, and the police station again on the right that flooded. The carousel at Easton's Beach, and people sweeping out their stores on Thames Street, getting the water out. Okay, so continuing, we had Hurricane Gloria in 1985. I have pictures of some of these, but I don't have them I have enough pictures in this presentation. Hurricane Bob, I think most of us remember that. I was very fortunate at that time. My daughter was working in Boulder, Colorado, and that week we were out in Boulder, Colorado, so we just got to watch it on TV. And when we came home, we couldn't get into our driveway because the trees were all down in the driveway. Yes?
What happened to Hurricane Donna? Wasn't that in 55?
Oh, there are numerous others. I didn't include them all. Yeah, there were lots. Irene was another one that we all experienced. Sandy was another one, and on they go, rather on they come. We're not out of the season yet, people. Some of these hurricanes were in November. Okay, well, stand by. So, in conclusion, will it happen again? Of course it will. We all know it will. It almost did last week. Will we be better prepared, better forewarned maybe? The Weather Bureau really gives us a lot more information. But better prepared? Probably not. More homes have been built closer to the water over time. And we do have the advantage of a very highly technically oriented Weather Bureau who really keep us informed as to what's going on, almost endlessly. Got so tired of seeing Tony Petrarca last week. I mean, it was just on and on and on. It's changed direction by 3 degrees now, but maybe it's going to weaken and go the other way, that kind of thing. Anyway, we do have the Weather Channel, and we do have all kinds of information available to us. And of course, we have Weather Bureau people who love to Weather Bureau people who love to stand out in this stuff and have the waves breaking over them. So if we lose power, we won't be able to watch the Weather Channel. And how are we going to charge our cell phones? We'll be really panicky. Might even have trouble getting food. So that does hang over us a lot at this time of the year. We all are concerned about that. But one thing is really certain in this situation. And this is the last slide. Nature always wins. We don't have the ability to protect ourselves from storms. This is Long Wharf in 1938. It isn't really Long Wharf, it's all underwater. But that's what can happen. And we live in this area, not as bad as Florida, but in a very vulnerable area. But we can see it coming better. Florida, all of a sudden it's over Haiti or someplace, and then bam, it hits Florida. We at least get to watch it come up the Atlantic Ocean, up the coast, and see it coming. So that's the end of my presentation. I will be happy to take questions if you have them. Go ahead.
The blizzard of 70.
Oh, by the way, let me say one thing. If you're asking a question, please speak loud so everyone can hear you. I'll try to repeat them if I can. But
I'm just wondering if the blizzard of 78 would be considered a hurricane, but in the winter.
No, but we got 30 inches of snow. And I walked down the West Main Road to go get milk in the middle of the road. But yes, it's obviously a weather event, and as hurricanes are. The problem with hurricanes is they're very limited to September, October, mostly. And the winter storms can come just about any time. Yes?
Yeah, in Island Park, after the 38 hurricane, they put up the seawall.
Mm-hmm.
That made a difference in 54.
Mm.
And one thing I do have is a picture of me and my brothers on that wall a few days before the hurricane came.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
I'm sure the waves still went over it, though.
Oh, yeah, they did.
Yeah.
In front of my house, in 38, the water level was 4'5". In 54, it was 4'3". They measured that by knowing where the water was. And of course, it was nice because the house had a second floor, so that's what they say about hurricanes.
I've heard that either you can't or it's very difficult to get flood insurance in Island Park.
Yeah, right.
You know, it's just, insurance companies don't want to mess with that. Bob?
In regards to the wall, seawall in Island Park, there was a hurricane in 44, and that may have taken that seawall out because the state rebuilt the seawall as it is today with that nice peak cap on it. And all of the old seawall, they just left on the beach behind the wall, and that was there for years and years. And finally the town cleared that all out.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, again, stand on Park Avenue, look over that seawall to the Atlantic Ocean. Very vulnerable.
One of the problems there was back in, say, 38, when the seawall was rebuilt, the town put new culverts and outflows onto the beach. And those outflows were probably 2-3 feet above the sand. Today you go down to Island Park and you can't find the outflows because the sand has encroached up onto the seawall. And that's been one of the things I've mentioned over the years and nothing's ever been done about it. That sand built up now it's 3 feet from the top of the seawall. just pushes that water over in even a small storm.
I think
The
you told
state
me,
says they don't have the plans.
you told me also that Island Park was an island because there was a stream that went through there, right at the bottom of the street.
With a wooden bridge.
Yeah, the wooden bridge, so Island Park was totally an island back in the day. Yes, Tim?
Jim, I don't have a question, but with your permission, I would very briefly tell you a story.
Go right ahead.
When Carol came in 1954, I was 7 years old at the family farm around the corner here on Middle Road, and remember vividly watching trees come down from the farm. But now, this is a true story that you will not believe. When Edna came along, I remember it also very vividly. I mean, it was a pretty strong storm, but it was 110 mile an hour gusts on Block Island anyway. So the Hurricane Carol took down a giant pear tree, maybe 30 feet tall, outside our house. But as you say, Edna came along from a somewhat different direction. The winds were coming from the opposite direction. And even though that pear tree, its roots were totally out of the ground, Edna replanted the tree. I told you we were and we had pears there the next year.
Where was the peach orchard?
The peach orchard?
Where was it located?
The peach orchard was, you know where that, it's the old Rhode Island Highway Department barn is? As you go down 24, it's over on the left-hand side. The old one, not the new one they just built, but over on that side. You know, the Hathaway's peach orchard over there. And again, houses from Park Avenue ended up there. It's hard to believe. I mean, just, but again, keep in mind that a lot of the houses in Island Park did not have foundations. They were built on the ground. And so therefore they were easily picked up by 110 knots of wind. Other questions? Yes?
I just want to add, and then I have my question, but in the spring, if you look around where the golf course is, you'll see some peach trees in blossom.
Really?
Yes. I
Interesting.
visited there as a young child because my godmother was a relative of the Hathaways. And I remember being there where they had a big place where the trucks would come up and load up the trucks. And I tell about this and everybody looks at me like I have 3 heads because they don't know what I'm talking about. But I wonder what was going on during the 2 bad hurricanes on the west side of Portsmouth. Was Weyerhaeuser down there, or were there big ships out there?
Weyerhaeuser came in 1926, so it was there. And it got beat up a lot too.
When did they leave? Was it because of hurricanes that bringing these?
No, they left because the railroad went out of business. And they couldn't get supplied by rail. That was one of the main reasons anyway.
And my other question was, could you mention any lighthouses where anybody might have been caught when the surge came?
There were stories that Prudence Island had a lighthouse where I think 2 or 3 people died on the Prudence Island lighthouse in 38. Yeah, there were lighthouse keepers. I mean, any lighthouses that there were had keepers, and in some cases they had to be there to turn the light on, and so they were really vulnerable. And something like some of the islands off Newport, just Rose Africa, everything got taken up in there. And I've seen pictures of that. But it really was the power of wind. Again, the power of nature is something that no matter how much we talk about it, no matter how much we study it, we can't control it. And as we've noticed in the last few years, it's getting worse. There's much more vulnerability than there was before, although it's pretty bad before too. Yes?
Yeah, I'm just going to add to the lady there. A couple of people got stranded out on Gooseberry Island. I can't think of a worse place to be during that. And there were workers. They were getting ready for an outing for the next day. I worked with rich folks. One was a cook, and there was 2 housemen or something. The woman panicked, and she was gonna try to make a swim for it. But what she, the guy stayed, they hunkered down in the shack, apparently, they survived, although they were almost killed with the rocks that came through. This woman supposedly got into a water system. She thought she was gonna float across, but unfortunately they found her body in the lily pond.
I think that might have been on Van Allen's estate. Van Allen's,
I don't know who they were working for,
Yeah.
who owned Gooseberry Island at that time, but,
look at some of those books downstairs, and just so many human interest stories.
Yeah.
Things that happen to people.
yeah. And then, right up the street was the Seafair Estate, close to the Green Bridge, that after that storm got renamed Hurricane Hut.
Mhm.
And you're probably very aware of that, where Jay Leno
Yeah.
built it owns now. Yeah.
And there's one out there right in that same area on the drive where, I mean, the back door goes into the water just about. I mean, it's a huge mansion, but it's right on the water.
Yeah, yeah, they're gonna get, when the next one comes, they're gonna get it.
Yeah, there's been a lot of transition of things in Newport and this area also. Again, Newport was mostly stone houses that got beat up or flooded. We got a lot of wooden houses out here that suffered a lot of damage and everything. But they've been rebuilt, and we move on to the next one. But we're always forewarned. We're always, again, we can listen to the TV guys talk for hours, and as much as we can absorb it, and as much as the technology of it tells us what's coming and what's going on, we can be better prepared if we want to believe it. And we don't always believe it. That's the problem. We don't accept the fact, it's not going to hit here. It wobbled, it's moved a little bit. Anyway, another question? Yeah.
Yeah, my father prepared for it. When he won the Mega Bucks, $1.3 million, he jacked the house up, put the basement above ground, so now he doesn't have to worry about any water coming in the house.
Yeah, just drive down Park Avenue and think about those houses on the right-hand side, especially the water side. They're pretty vulnerable to just about any storm when you can look behind them and see the Atlantic Ocean. You know, and a fairly narrow transit up the Secundit River, which would funnel the water into greater strength, and that's a problem. Any other quick questions? Well, thank you all for coming. Be sure to look.